what's up? My name is Michelle, and today I'm going to be doing a video on the Toy Box Killer. Um, Before I get into the video, I do want to put a disclaimer out there that this is a very heavy story. There's a lot of very heavy things in it, so just be cautious of that before you watch. I completely understand if it's too rough for you or whatever, you need to click away. But just be aware that it is going to be a rough story. Alright, let's get into the video. Alright, so this story starts with a man by the name of David Ray Parker. He was born on November 6th, 1939, and he lived in New Mexico. His father was reported as being an abusive drunk, and he abused David and his mother and David's sister. David's parents had divorced when David was about 10, and David moved to live with his grandparents at that time. His grandfather was very strict and was physically abusive. David's father didn't live with them, and it was reported when David's father was around, he was not a very good influence on David, and he introduced David to pornographic magazines. David's mother wasn't around very much, or wasn't around at all. And when David's parents had divorced, David's mother had become an alcoholic, and it's kind of like the divorce just kind of, she went off the edge after that. And she started abusing drugs and alcohol. And David had reported that all through his years of school, he was bullied up until he graduated. And then once he got into high school, he started abusing drugs and alcohol. And he had begun to grow more increasingly fascination with the porn magazines and things like that. And he started developing a fascination with BDSM as well. David's sister had found out about David having pornographic photos and magazines and some drawings. And then David had joined the Army and got a dishonorable discharge. While in the Army, he was a mechanic, and it was reported that David was pretty much a mechanic his entire life. David was described as friendly, funny, and very handy. And then David married his first wife and told her as a teenager he captured a woman, and he tied her up to a tree and tortured and killed her. So reportedly, David's wife had taken this with a grain of salt, pretty much, and she just thought it was from a mental illness. His wife would eventually say he had increasingly disturbing behavior, and that was what caused their marriage to fail. David was married 4 times, and he divorced all 4 of them. David had 2 daughters. And in his 50s, he lived in New Mexico in a small town called Elephant Butte. Don't ask, I didn't name it. And adjacent to that was another small town called Truth and Consequences. And in between those was a large man-made lake. Unfortunately, this area had brought in a lot of sex workers and drugs. And at this time, these 2 cities were the second highest crime rate cities in America, including murders and assaults. So, crime happened a lot in these cities, and it unfortunately happened a lot with drugs, assaults, and murders. David had saved a lot of money over the years, and he had gotten a new girlfriend whose name was Cindy. He had met Cindy, they both had worked at the Elephant Butte State Park, so that's where he met her. and it's the largest it's the largest park in New Mexico. David had met Cindy while she was doing community service. They eventually moved in with each other, and they lived in a double-wide mobile home. The two of them spent over $100,000 on a soundproof trailer and all the stuff in it. The trailer was on David's property, and it was stocked with saws, knives, needles, surgical tools, whips, chains, straps, a fur-lined coffin, electrocution clamps, ropes, and sex toys. And the walls were all decorated with very graphic pornographic pictures. And then David had begun making his own sex toys. He made some plastic dildos out of PVC pipe, and he would, at the base of them, he would put nails at them, sticking upward all around it so that it would cut the skin. David had a gynecologist chair and a homemade electrical generator that he used for torture. David would also use animals and didn't want consenting adults. And in 1999, David posed as an undercover cop and approached a sex worker named Cynthia. And he had told her that she was under arrest. And then he had handcuffed her. And once he had handcuffed her, he had taken her back to the trailer where she was still bound with handcuffs, and then she was bound to a bed and had a dog collar around her neck that had nails in it. She was there for 3 days, and David would go to work, and while he would go to work, he would have Cindy keep an eye on Cynthia. So David's girlfriend, Cindy, so one day, Cindy gets a call, and so she steps away and she takes this phone call. Well, as she's taking this phone call, Cynthia sees that there is a table next to the bed that has the handcuff keys on it. So she is able to unbound her hands or her wrists, and then, of course, Cindy hears commotion, so she goes back into the trailer, and then she sees that Cynthia has unlocked herself. So, Cindy jumps on top of Cynthia and starts to try to fight her. So then Cindy grabs a lamp and hits Cynthia in the head with it. And then Cynthia is able to grab an ice pick and stabs Cindy in the head with it. So once Cindy falls to the floor, Cynthia, takes that advantage and runs. And then Cynthia goes down to the main road, and she's yelling and trying to get anyone's attention, flag down anyone she can. Then she had knocked on someone's door, and the lady brings her in, and they call the police. The police had taken Cynthia to the hospital, and it was reported that first the police did not think that Cynthia's story was credible. But at that time, while she was telling them what had happened, guess who walks in the hospital? It was Cindy. And so Cynthia starts freaking out and saying, "Hey, that's the lady who did this to me." So then the police questioned Cindy and David, and they both were taken into custody. The police had found the trailer, and they searched it. The police said that they had seen a sign that said Satan's Den, and believed that that was David's motive. There was a list of David's victims between 1993 and 1997 with dates. There was a bulletin that had photos of some of David's victims and a note with guidelines. I don't know if the guidelines were for David or they were for his victims. I'm not sure. And then there was also a sign that said, "A woman will do anything to get loose." David also had some camera footage of one of his victims, and the police had reviewed it, and they saw that David had a victim tied up to a chair. And the lady obviously looked like she was not in a place to give consent. So David would play the audio recording to his victims before he tortured them, basically telling them what they're about to endure. And the victim had a tattoo that the police were able to identify, so the police put out the tattoo to the public. And a woman named Kelly said that, had seen the tattoo, and she had recognized the tattoo as being hers. So she goes to the police, and then Kelly later testified July 24th of 1996 that she and her husband had gotten into an argument, so she decided to go out with some friends. And then Kelly reported that she had ran into an old friend, and her name is Jessie. Jessie is David's daughter, and Kelly had known Jessie for a few years, so when her friends decided to leave the bar for the night, Kelly felt comfortable hanging out with Jessie by herself. And then towards the end of the night, Kelly had reported feeling dizzy and ill, and she had only had one beer, so she asked Jessie to take her home. Kelly reported that from that moment, or from there, she didn't remember anything. And then it was later reported that Jessie had drugged Kelly's beer, and instead of taking Kelly home, she took her to David's trailer. And then when Kelly got there, a dog collar was placed around her throat, and she was locked up in the trailer. Kelly blacked out several times throughout the 2 days she was there and had been constantly drugged. David had thought that Kelly was dead, so he decided to take her body and dump her off onto the side of the road. And another man had found Kelly, so he had taken Kelly home. Once Kelly had returned, she'd obviously told her husband, and her husband didn't believe her because he thought she was out either cheating on him or on a drug binge. And so he ended up divorcing Kelly, and Kelly moved to Colorado, and that all happened in about a week. Like, I could not imagine going through all that in a week. Kelly had later reported in an interview that she kept having nightmares, and the nightmares were of her being held down and raped, and she thought it was because of stress. But when Kelly went to the police, they questioned her and if she remembered anything or knew who David was. And when the police brought up the recording, Kelly had no idea. The media started putting Kelly's story out there, and another victim had come forward. The other victim's abuse had taken place right before Cynthia's. That victim's name was Angelica, and because Angelica was a sex worker, nothing happened with her case. The investigator spoke to Cindy, David's girlfriend, and she told them that she was involved in many of the assaults and told them that she would give them as much information about David in order to get a lesser sentence. So Cindy had told investigators that David knew he had been tipped off. She said David thought that he owned women, and when he talked about killing his victims, he would call them packages. She told them David would make his own devices and told them David would have pictures of these victims, but would burn them as time passed. Cynthia claimed that David had killed over 30 women and had said that David tried to dump the bodies in a lake that was between those two cities, but learned that they would come back up, so he had learned that to cut open their stomachs and fill them with like rocks and tie them back up with chicken wire, and then he would throw them back in so that they would sink. Cindy had said that David had dropped about 7 bodies in that lake. Investigators had never checked the lake because it was too costly. So Cindy was charged with conspiracy to commit kidnapping, accessory to criminal penetration, and was sentenced to 36 years in prison, and only had served 19 of those years of her sentence, and then was up for release in 2017. Jessie was known to be a drug dealer, and she lived with her mother, one of David's ex-wives, and had a rocky relationship with her father. So Jessie would say she never knew what was happening to the girls. She just thought that David was raping them, and that she didn't ever participate in any of the killings or rape. Later on, accusations of Jessie drugging Kelly had led to her arrest on April 26, 1999. Jessie was charged with kidnapping, criminal sexual penetration, criminal sexual conduct, and conspiracy. And then Jessie was released only after serving 2.5-year sentence. And then she was put on probation for a year. The audio supposed that David was not working alone. And there's also some other theories that there was even cops or a bunch of other people involved in helping David commit these crimes. And then David had, of course, denied everything since his arrest, and he stated he was paying them and it was consensual. David showed no remorse and stated he was the victim. The courts could only convict David with 3 cases, even though it was suspected David had over 60 more victims. David had a journal with dates and every victim and everything he had done to them. So, they knew that he had more than just those 3 cases, but they couldn't convict him on any of those without those victims coming forward. So in 2001, the courts put David through 3 separate trials for each one of the victims who had come forward, and the trial for Angelica was never brought forward because she'd passed away from a drug overdose. So that's really sad. I wish that there was something like that we could do to, bring awareness to those victims, even that lose their life or, tragically pass away or something, that we could still bring justice to them or something like that. But David had agreed to a plea deal and a 224-year prison sentence in exchange of his daughter Jessie to receive a reduced sentence. The police have never been able to locate any of these other victims, and David had agreed to show police where the victims' remains were. May 28th of 2002, David died of a massive heart attack at the age of 62. November 2002, the trailer was opened to the public in hopes to bring out more victims, but they never had any more victims come out from the trailer being opened. In October of 2011, the FBI searched the McRae Canyon looking for more potential victims, but they never found any remains or anything leading to other victims. So that is the end of our story, and I hope that you guys enjoyed the video. And I also want to just say that I mean no disrespect to any of these victims or their families, and I just want to say that these victims and their families are in my prayers and thoughts, and I am sorry that, that's the way that life is sometimes, that even when we are mixed up in the wrong stuff, that we don't always get justice for those people because of the things that they're into. But yeah, once again, I just hope that you guys like this video, like it, share it, comment, do whatever you want with it, and I will see you later. Peace out.